So I have been an entrepreneurship mentor for approximately 17 years. And what I find typically is that, especially for very early stage innovators and very early stage innovations, I keep asking the same 15 questions over and over again. Perhaps I asked slightly different questions depending on what vertical the venture concept is in. But this is a very labor-intensive and frankly somewhat tedious process, asking the same questions over and over again. So the typical scenario is a student comes in and says, how good is my venture concept? And typically I would ask them the same set of 15 questions. And some of them the student can answer, some it can't. And then I try to guide them in the right direction. They go back, do some research, and come back in, and we go through this process several times. So as I said, this is a very time-consuming, labor-intensive operation. So the idea was, can we design a somewhat more automated, more efficient, less labor-intensive, but still as effective a means of mentoring students at very early stages, kind of like Siri. Instead of asking a physical mentor, why don't we ask Siri questions that you might have, because they are typically the same set of questions. So the methodology we developed is the following. It has 8 steps to it, and I'll take you through these 8 steps relatively quickly. We first identify a set of domain experts, and they prepare a set of questions to ask entrepreneurs. Either the generic questions that I mentioned to you, or organized by field, and possibly both, of course. And so obviously you can't read this, but these are some examples. If you pause the video, you can read about questions on the generic side over here. Questions about therapeutics, questions about medical devices, questions about diagnostics, etc. And of course, some of these questions apply to tech, but one can imagine providing a set of questions for B2B SaaS, marketplaces, you name it. So the domain experts who prepare the questions also assign a weighing factor, because one of the questions may be a showstopper if the answer is not satisfactory, and so that particular question would be weighed more heavily than others. Then what we do is provide a drop-down list of options that the founder can choose. For example, how large is your market? Millions and millions, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, less than 10,000, etc., etc. And eventually, of course, we want to know the exact size of the market as accurately as possible. But for very beginners who have not yet done the research and who are not familiar with entrepreneurship terminology, this gives them an easier route in. So here are some of the choices: very easy, extremely difficult, etc., etc., to some of the answer choices, as you can see. So we assign a commercialization feasibility assessment value, actually the domain experts do this, to each of the possible choices for answers. So beyond the weighing factor, what is the significance of a very large market versus a tiny little niche market? These get numerical assignments individually. Then first the innovator or the entrepreneur goes and answers these set of questions through the drop-down choices available to him or her, and includes a brief explanation as to why they believe this was the correct response to the question. This allows us to calculate the innovator's self-assessment score for this particular venture concept, and one can imagine that a student can run this with 5 different ideas that they have and get a relative assessment of which one is the most viable or appropriate for that particular founder. Steps 5 and 6 are repeated by multiple innovation and entrepreneurship domain expert reviewers. So these are not the people who prepared the questions, but they answer the question with respect to the innovation that is under consideration. So the founder answers the questions, and then up to 3, 4, 5 reviewers answer the questions also. And the system calculates the variance between the founders and the reviewers' assessment scores, along with some explanations as to the cause of the variances. The reason why we look at variances is because if the founder is overly optimistic or overly pessimistic as compared to the domain expert reviewers, we want that to be indicated in the score that is given. At the moment, this platform is available as an Excel, and we are working on moving it online, at which time it will be a more powerful and more accessible tool available to everyone. I thank you for listening.